Thank you, Tori, for that lovely introduction, and good morning, everyone. It is so lovely to be here today with you all, and it is such an honor to present our wonderful, inspiring lineup of speakers on our lived experience panel. Sorry, I'm not sure if everyone else is everyone able to see the screen?
Nope.
Okay, we'll just wait a second while that gets started. Just a little bit of troubleshooting, everyone, but I'm sure we're all very excited to get into things. So our panel will run from 11:30 to 12:30. So if anyone would like to, oh, wonderful, we have our screen up. But if anyone would like to grab a little glass of water or run to the washroom, please feel free to go ahead. But like I said, welcome to our lived experience panel. Medical Herstory is so excited to be hosting this for you today. And I guess we'll just jump right into introducing our wonderful, wonderful speakers. So first up, we have Christine Olivo. Christine, who goes by she, her, has spent the last 14 years living with irritable bowel syndrome since she was first diagnosed in 2007. Struggling to manage the pain, anxiety, and loneliness, Christine created an Instagram account called My IBS Life in June of 2019 as a way to cope through memes, sarcasm, and humor. Her page has now become a home and a community to 42,000 plus chronic illness warriors who are looking to be heard, understood, validated, and accepted. Through My IBS Life, it is Christine's mission to bring awareness to the reality of living life with irritable bowel syndrome and other digestive disorders through comical and relatable content. She also runs the My IBS Life podcast and YouTube channel, where she talks more openly about her personal experiences with IBS and anxiety. It's her goal to create and maintain a safe, open space for anyone living with IBS and to inspire others to share their own chronic illness journeys. So Christine, we're so excited to have you today. If you'd like to quickly just unmute, say hi, and give us a wave, we can make sure your mic is up and running as well.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here.
Lovely. Thanks so much. Okay, so next up we have Cassandra. Cassandra Earl is a 20-year-old university student who uses she, her pronouns and lives in Toronto, Canada. In addition to being a student, Cassandra also has multiple chronic illnesses, including a diagnosis of endometriosis that she received when she was a teenager. In December of 2020, she created an Instagram account called Her Uterus, where she discusses her experience living with chronic reproductive illness, as well as encouraging conversations about menstrual health. She makes short form videos on TikTok, graphics, and blog posts, all while using humor and education to foster a community where people from around the world can support one another through the difficult journey that is chronic illness. Cassandra, would you like to say hi?
Hi. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm using my AirPods.
Yes, we can definitely hear you.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Great. Okay, so now please allow me to present Philippa Ayana. Phil goes by she, her pronouns, runs an Instagram and TikTok page where she shares everything to do with her life as a disabled ambulatory wheelchair user. She creates videos, photos, and writes captions about things specific to her life, such as sharing the ups and downs of her diagnosis journey, as well as opening the discussion about things affecting the disability and chronic illness community. She created her Instagram page just under a year ago with the aim to empower fellow disabled people, raise awareness for disabilities and chronic illnesses, and to change the perception of how the world views disability. Phil, would you like to give us a little shout?
Hello. Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Lovely. So nice to meet you all. So now we have the wonderful Lynn. Lynn goes by they, them pronouns and is a non-binary patient advocate for women's and femme health and an online healthcare content creator. They serve as a regional captain for the Ambassadors Program at the Chronic Disease Coalition and helped co-found the Endometriosis Crisis Connection, where they serve as the Executive Resource Director and Vice President of the Board of Directors. They're also producing the Endotrauma podcast that will be published in fall 2021. With over 50,000 followers on TikTok, B is known for their parodies and the original character, the Mean Patient Advocate. B uses this character to tell stories and spread awareness about toxicity within the medical system, including bias against minority groups and the difficulty patients with endometriosis and other chronic illnesses face living with their diseases. Bee's mission is to include the patient experience in the healthcare narrative. Bee, we'd love to meet you.
Good morning, everybody.
Hello, hello. Okay, so now I would like to introduce you all to Neelam Heera, who uses she, her pronouns. I hope she was able to connect. Neelam is a TEDx speaker, and she founded Sisters, which is a grassroots charity dedicated to supporting individuals with reproductive and mental health issues after facing her own battles around diagnosis and care and wanting to address the health inequities faced by those from communities of color and the LGBT community. Most recently, the organization has changed its name to become inclusive of trans communities as well by removing the word woman. Neelam's work has been recognized by the Pride of Britain and Point of Light Awards from the Prime Minister. Neelam I think she's having some connectivity issues, but hopefully will join soon in a couple of minutes, at which point she will, of course, say hello to all of us. So moving on, last but definitely not least, our final speaker on today's panel, Tanika Valbrun. Tanika goes by she, her, and is an award-winning journalist and nonprofit leader. After her personal struggles with uterine fibroids, Tanika's desire to support herself and other women inspired her to create the White Dress Project, a nonprofit organization on a mission to raise global awareness about the uterine fibroid epidemic through education, research, community, and advocacy. By sharing her personal story, Tanika has encouraged thousands of women across the world to speak up, be their own best health advocate, and no longer suffer in silence. As such, the White Dress Project is made up of women with impactful fibroid journeys who are uniquely positioned to educate, empower, and support those who are managing life with fibroids. Tanika, would you like to give us a little hello?
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Okay, wonderful. So now that we all know our illustrious panelists, I'm sure all of us are very excited to get started. So we'll just dive right into our first prompt. And like I said, as soon as Neelam joins us, we'll pause so she can have a little hello. So the first question that I'd like to pose to our wonderful panelists is, if you could tell us a little bit about the importance of destigmatizing patient experiences. And if there's someone who'd like to jump right in and go first, please do go ahead. And I will drop all of the questions in the chat as soon as I ask them in case anyone wants to, refer back to them. Any takers for first speaker of the day?
I can go first.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cassandra.
Also, sorry for my background. I am on family vacation in BC, so this is what we're working with. So
we love a bit of nature. We love a bit of nature.
The lighting is not great, but anyways, I think destigmatizing, I mean, obviously it's a bit more of a different experience being a white young female, a little bit different in my experience than probably someone else's. So obviously just gonna speak from my experience, but I think destigmatizing in like a social setting is where it's important in my life, at least. So not being afraid to take my medication at parties, not being afraid to discuss it with friends, not being afraid to be vocal about my pain, not hide it, not keep it to myself. And by doing that, we are destigmatizing and opening the door to other people to have those conversations. I can't even tell you how many people have said, wait, that's not normal. I experienced that. I didn't know that that was something that wasn't normal. I thought I was alone in my experience. So I think by destigmatizing those taboo subjects, we are helping other people, and that in itself is more than enough reason to take down that stigma.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to jump right in?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Oh, hey, B, are you? Okay.
Okay, so Tanika, why don't you go ahead and then we'll have B go right after you.
Okay, sounds good. I completely agree with Cassandra. But first, let me start by saying thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you for holding this forum. I'm listening to everyone's bio and I'm like, oh my goodness, we are like doing it out here. So really excited to be on this panel and just to learn about all of the work that you all are doing to ensure that the patient voice is at the forefront of all of our issues that we're discussing, chronic illnesses that we're discussing, and really making sure that people feel empowered to share their story. So that's one of the ways at the White Dress Project that we destigmatize uterine fibroids and talking about uterine fibroids, one of the most important things that we do is encourage people to share their story. Often people are not interested in hearing about issues, I like to call them below the belt. No one wants to talk about periods, blood, bleeding, pain, but I believe that we really should be, because then we destigmatize, and like Cassandra said, we eliminate the feeling of it being a taboo topic. And I feel like if we gave context to our how these diseases are impacting our quality of life, how it impacts us in social settings, in our careers, and really give the context to how it's impacting us, then people would better understand what we are living with. And I think just by that mere action, it destigmatizes what's happening, because we become familiar with the terms and we become familiar with what's happening. I often talk about in my story how, I have never bought a car with cloth seats because I know that blood can get out of leather seats easier, right? So when you give people those types of context, then they are able to understand better what you're living with and how you're living with it. And this is not to say that at moments there won't be feelings of embarrassment or loneliness. But like I said, I think the more we begin to share our stories, then we destigmatize some of these chronic illnesses that we're facing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right, B, would you still like to jump right in?
Sure. So I just wanted to say thank you for the panelists that just spoke. To continue that, I studied social norms and international law. That was where I started, and I really became a patient advocate and worked in healthcare because of my experience as a patient. But as we're talking about stigmatization, a lot of these items are social norms, so they're not just hard to share online, they're hard to share in general, and that's where we're feeling pushback. And one of the things that I had a lot of pushback on is that I'm non-binary and I'm 30 years old, and I came out at 29 years old because my chronic illness was women's health. And there is a good portion of our community that are trans or non-binary, gender non-conforming, and they can't speak out because they don't feel comfortable. And how we change that is by speaking out. And I get, I've had videos that have over 500,000 to 1 million views, and I get hate comments saying that this should not be spoken about, but that is outweighed by 3,000 comments saying, I went through this too. And when you have 3,000 people saying, I went through this too, there needs to be change. So one thing I want to add is when we share these narratives and share our stories, we're actually helping others heal and others feel less stigmatized, in means of they don't have to even share their story. They just have to be on board. And that's what makes us leaders in the community.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's such an important point and serves as a really great reminder for all of us to be so conscious of the language we use to ensure we're being, as inclusive as possible. Because definitely, I think, stigma around patient experiences kind of almost acts as like that first barrier where people are even afraid to seek out healthcare or even talk to their communities about their experiences. But I think we have one more speaker, so please feel free to jump in, Christine.
Yeah.
Oh, we have a couple more speakers actually. Christine, go ahead, and then we'll go to Phil.
Sure. Yeah. Again, thank you so much for having me today. I am so excited to be here with so many amazing and inspiring women. I feel like my imposter syndrome is screaming right now, but I think you have all brought up so many valid and incredible points already. And one thing that I would add is also, I think the importance of talking about all this is not only helping us, all of us that feel this way as patients, but I think we're also really shaping the way healthcare is going to be in the future. I have a brother-in-law who is studying to be a doctor, and I've talked a lot to him about my own personal issues. I have IBS, which is a gastro issue, and he's always interested in knowing more about it. And when I was telling him about the awful experiences I've had with doctors, whether they're male or female, he kind of looked at me and was just like, you know, doctors need to be more empathetic. Like, I don't think they really view patients as humans sometimes, and to like hear it from someone how awful it's been, and for you to like share your story out loud, it makes me as a doctor want to do better and shape my questions better and get to know you as a person better, so that we can actually get to the root cause of things and not just have a checklist. And if you don't fit into it, we don't know what's wrong. And like some of you already said, you know, it makes people not want to get help. It makes people not want to go to the doctor and therefore be in pain and be miserable longer. So that's definitely part of my mission with my IBS life, is to talk about it and to let others know that they're not alone, but to also hopefully spark conversation within doctors and nutritionists and stuff like that in the healthcare industry.
Thank you so much for that perspective. Definitely an important point. And finally, last but not least, Phil, if you'd like to take it away and provide your thoughts on this question as well.
Yeah, of course. So just want to say thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited and a little bit nervous to be here. So I feel like I reduce stigma, just like everyone else has said, just by talking about it openly, and also sharing experiences is so important. I don't really want to be conscious of repeating what other people have said. But also for me as a disabled person, normalizing disability, and not only for like non-disabled people, making people aware of it, but also normalizing it for other disabled people and chronically ill people, so that they, it shows that we're included and that we're not alone. I also share a lot of stories of ableism I've experienced and things like that, to educate people on like the reality of our lives and show also how common it is, because it is like a daily experience. Yeah, I'm not really sure if we've got anything else to add really. I think also, yeah, people are quite uncomfortable generally about disability and scars and disabled bodies and things like that. So like one of the ways that I would destigmatize is to share photos of like me and my mobility aids and things like that, because it also, it just normalizes it and raises awareness, especially being young and having a mobility aid is not something that people normally see. So to be able to be that representation for people, I think is really important.
Absolutely. No, it is so important. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. All right, so I think everyone has kind of touched on these issues a little bit in their answers already, but the next kind of prompt I'd like to pose to all of you is if you could share about what roles gender and sexism, shame and stigma have played in shaping your personal health experiences. And if anyone would like to get us started, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I can ask someone to jump in if they feel comfortable.
I can go first.
Okay, thanks, Christine.
Sure. So I feel like I'm going to preface this with, I feel like I have a pretty negative view of healthcare right now, of being a woman, and I'm sure that's something we've all felt, and I'm hoping that that will change in the future. But for me personally, as a young woman that has stomach issues, I feel like my whole healthcare like journey through IBS has just been me thinking that being a young woman just means getting dismissed automatically. That all of my symptoms are always related to, you know, my period, which I know the last speaker was just talking about. I caught the tail end of that. You know, my symptoms are related to my period. It's all hormonal, you know, it's all stress related. It's, you know, I would walk into so many appointments, and I still do to this day, like almost like ready to fight and like be on the defense, and have like this whole spiel of like this doctor I don't even know yet, and just being able to tell them like, you're not taking me seriously, you're not hearing me, like, and it's such an awful feeling to already have that in your head when you're walking into an appointment that you're hoping is going to help you and provide you with relief and some answers. So for me personally, you know, my gender has made, I feel like, getting treatment and being taken seriously as a patient really hard these last 14 years. And kind of like I said before, I've seen both like male and female doctors, and I've experienced it from both. So that's kind of my take on it right now, but yeah, hoping that will change.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Christine, and for being so vulnerable. And yes, I too hope that will change in the very, very near future. Our next speaker, would anyone like to go? Feel free to unmute.
I can go.
Wonderful.
So I just want to preface this by saying I'm a cancer survivor, and I think that that has set up my experience to be negative as well. And it's okay that your experience is negative for anyone who's listening. There's nothing wrong with that. I had to learn very quickly that the way that the world treated cancer was not how they treated chronic illness and female problems. And not only that, I lost my train of thought, but I fought constantly to be seen. And even the words, well, at least it's not cancer, was being said during my cancer journey. I was like, wait, what? Like, it is. And what we don't really put strong enough to these situations is I experienced a lot of trauma. I experienced a lot of shame, thinking, growing up in a very conservative household, my period was shameful. And because the pain started on my period, I have been suffering with endometriosis for 17 years. That was something that you just didn't talk about or didn't do. And I was shut down. And a lot of patients are gaslit at home. So when they go into the doctor's office, why would they speak up? And then we get feedback from doctors that we're not speaking up enough. But there is a toxicity in that dichotomy already, where we don't have a safe space in these doctors' offices, and doctors aren't even aware of that a lot of the time. I was part of a conference where a doctor was like, patients don't do a good enough job explaining their symptoms. And it's like, you're putting that fault and that blame back on us. So why would we listen? I see that as a patient advocate as well, or even in friends who are like, I don't share my health journey, but your health journey is part of your story. So I experienced a lot of trauma, and even constantly feeling like a failure because I'm not the same as my peers, and that has rippled into my life, and that makes you feel more ashamed, and I just feel like I feel like everyone is where they're supposed to be, but I had to learn very early that this toxic positivity of just do better, just smile, just this was not helpful. And that you have to really look at it from the perspective that being positive is being aware that the negative and good coexist, and that they're both there, and being aware of that is enough. And it took me a long time to experience that, but also it's really hard to find therapists to help you through what you're going through. So it's this big, it's like layers, it's like onions. So I'm done speaking.
Oh, thank you, Beef, so much for sharing that. I think you raised some really fantastic and valid points. And I think, any of us who've been in a doctor's office for any reason can kind of resonate with that feeling of almost feeling guilty for your own health issues, or being made to feel that way. So definitely, thank you so much. Would any of our other speakers like to jump in?
I can jump in for a sec.
Wonderful.
Just relating to what everybody else said, I was diagnosed when I was 17, but I've been dealing with the endometriosis since I was 13, since my first period. So a lot of the shame, the stigma, and my understanding of gender and sexism comes from my experiences as a teenager, as a child, honestly. A lot of my identity comes from sitting in doctor's offices, having to explain things to teachers, my friends not understanding, and then learning about myself through my diagnosis. I received a diagnosis of endometriosis, which is it was devastating to me, but also relieving. I feel like you guys relate to that in some way. But I received that before I even knew who I was as a person. I was a kid. I was learning who I was, and I was receiving this life-changing, I guess, piece of my life that I would have to live with forever. And as B said, finding a therapist to deal with that is like subpar. It is not something that is accessible, which is also a problem that I talk about on my account with mental health and mental illness. I didn't realize that I experienced trauma through my diagnosis until I started seeing a therapist when I was 19, not even for that purpose. And so I think that is a huge issue with, again, stigma and gender, because of the fact that we don't have access to that help and to talk about these things, and then to realize that that's what we went through, and then to work through it. I'm still working through it. I realized that when way later in life than I should have. So I'm trying to figure out who I am now, and it's been an interesting journey. So that's my 2 cents on gender and stigma and shame.
Thank you so much for those 2 cents. Honestly, all of our panelists so far have been just so forthcoming with your stories, and we really appreciate that so much. And I think everyone who's spoken, we're like resonating a little bit with, everything you're saying. So we have Tanika and Phil left. I think Tanika unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to add to this question. I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about, or I can talk about gender and sexism and shame and stigma, and also racism, and the fact that racism does exist in healthcare and that we do have health disparities. So just like everyone else talked about, feeling like this can form from your culture and your family and what your parents have taught you, and then having that feeling when you get to the doctor's office, so carrying that shame with you. And then as a Black woman, knowing historically what we have been through within healthcare and the health disparities that exist, for example, Tuskegee, Henrietta Lacks, like I could go on about historically how Black women have been treated in healthcare, particularly with uterine fibroids. I remember when I was diagnosed, I went to the doctor. It was a white male, and he told me that my uterus was way too compromised. I had too many fibroids, and that my husband and I just needed to save money and get a surrogate. And that was the first time I'd known about fibroids. My mom had them, so I was somewhat familiar. But in that moment, I felt so dismissed and so discouraged. And I also felt like, you do everything right? Whatever right is. You do everything that your parents tell you to do. Go to school, get a job, get married, have kids. And when you get to the point where you're hearing that that is your best option, you tend to think like, what did I do wrong? What have I done wrong? But not recognizing that that is also the physician's limitation. The physician was only speaking to what he knew and what he could perform, right? So they're not speaking to the vast amount of options that I had. And he was also speaking from a place of not seeing a Black woman before, and I have confirmed this. So having that health disparity, not dealing with a Black patient before, not knowing what to say, all of those things play into how you feel and how, what your health experience is. And I think that if we don't begin to eliminate those things and begin to call out that racism exists within healthcare, then we still have a major problem. So like I said, back to my story, when he said to me, get a surrogate and have a hysterectomy, I started to research how many times Black women are offered hysterectomy. And it is documented in literature that Black women are offered hysterectomy as a first line of treatment option for uterine fibroids, as like the first thing they're telling you to do. So I think, I agree with what everyone has said. I just wanted to add the point of racism, another ism, definitely does exist, obviously in our culture, but also in our healthcare systems. And as we continue to share our stories, whether you're Black or not, advocating for people of color is a part of this work as well.
Absolutely, Tanika. Thank you so much for sharing, your story with us, and also for bringing up that point, because that intersectionality is such an important part of, all of our experiences as women of color. It's really entwined. You can't really separate one from the other, I find, especially when, seeking healthcare in I would say like North America or another white majority country. It's definitely such an integral part of the experience. So really, thank you so much. And I think That's something that, Medical Herstory really values as well. The intersectionality of, race, sexism, disability, all of that. It's so important to talk about. So thank you. And Phil, our lovely Phil, would you like to go next? Just a little refresher, because I know it's been a second since I read out the question, but the question is, what roles have gender, sexism, shame, and stigma, or anything else, played in shaping your health experiences? And if you'd like, kind of going off of what Tanika shared with us, if you want to focus on a specific experience with a healthcare worker, you're free to do that as well, or just answering the general question too.
Yeah, I think, so obviously my health experience is kind of from, I was born with CHD, which is a congenital heart disease. And so my experience is very much from having new symptoms throughout my life and having everything put down to the CHD, because that's what I was born with and that's what I already had. And I definitely think that that's, even though it wasn't necessarily related, like pain and things like that, there's also just so much, like, I guess, stigma around disability anyway, especially in like the medical system. For example, I've been told by so many doctors, like, because I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user, they've said to me, oh, we need to get your strength up and get you out of that wheelchair. And when I use my wheelchair for fatigue, and my wheelchair is actually empowering and has changed my life. And if I was to just like push through and stop using my chair, I'll be even more exhausted and even more pain and able to do even less. So I think I do talk a lot about mobility aids and things, but like around using a wheelchair, it's not a negative thing. It's actually life-changing. I think more doctors need to understand the benefits of that, because it is harmful. And if I'd been using a wheelchair from an earlier stage, my life could have been so much different. Like I could have been able to do so much more. But because there was so much like stigma around it, and they were like, no, we don't want you using it, it's a step backwards, it has meant that I'm only now being able to actually have the benefits of using a wheelchair. And I just kind of think it's no wonder so many patients are so reluctant to use mobility aids when it's portrayed in such a negative way by doctors. Yeah, I also think I used to hide like my symptoms and say I was fine and things like that. And I would hide my scars, all just simply because of shame and stigma. And I do think it's only recently that I've actually been proud to be disabled. And I think this also really helped me advocate better, because I've been like, actually, I am experiencing all these things and I do need help for this. And it's not all in my head. And I think if I'd have done that sooner, maybe it would have been a bit different. Maybe I would have a diagnosis by now for like my other conditions, but yeah.
Absolutely. But I think it's so wonderful that you're doing that now, and that you're kind of, refusing to allow that stigma to be placed on using a wheelchair or, whatever other aids it may be, because I think definitely, from a healthcare perspective and even just in society, I think people tend to associate shame with that, when really like that's a ridiculous concept. So absolutely. Thank you so much. All right, so for our next question, Tanika, I think it was so wonderful how she shared her experience with a healthcare worker, and I'd like to kind of give our other panelists an opportunity to do that as well, if there's a specific experience, whether positive or negative, with a healthcare worker they've had that's kind of stuck with them, if anyone would like to share.
I have one that's kind of funny, not really that funny, but it made me laugh at the time. So it's not a great experience, obviously, but it might give everyone a laugh. So I was referred to a specialist after I saw my family doctor, and they told me I just had a bad period. Everyone knows that experience. And my parents were my biggest advocates, because my mom also had endometriosis, and so it was passed down to me. And so they were very involved in my life and in my healthcare journey. So I was referred to the specialist across town. I'm like 14 years old, have never had like a pap smear, an exam, anything like that. I'm basically a kid. And we went to this appointment, And I'd seen this lady like 1 or 2 other times, but she wasn't really great. My mom didn't really like her. I didn't really like her, but this is what we had to work with. And I was explaining my symptoms. I had an ultrasound, which came back clear. All my tests always came back clear. And my scans always came back clear. And she's telling my mom this. My mom's like, but she's still in pain. Her birth control isn't working. We've tried like 4 different kinds. Like, this isn't working. She's suffering. And the doctor looked at my mom dead in the eyes and goes, she feels this way because she eats McDonald's. So she needs to stop that. And you need to make sure that she doesn't do that anymore. And my mom's jaw hit the floor. And she looked at the doctor and said, she's a teenager. She's going to go out with her friends. She's going to have a normal life as much as possible. And if that means eating McDonald's every once in a while, I'm going to let her do that and not tell her that she can't. So we packed up our things and we stormed out of there and we never went back. But it's one of my favorite stories to tell people. It's terrible. And I hope that never happens to anyone else. But if you don't laugh at yourself every once in a while on this journey, you'll never get through it. So anyways.
Oh my goodness, Cassandra, thank you for sharing. I think that's definitely more a question of laughing at the doctor than laughing at yourself. And I'm sorry you had to, endure that, but I'm so glad your mother was there to be like an advocate for you. I think that's so powerful and really shows us all kind of the value of advocating for yourself and standing up for yourself, for your loved ones. So yeah, definitely both of you, the heroes of that story. Before we move on, would anyone else like to share an experience they wanted to highlight?
I'll go. I actually really relate to Cassandra's story. It's like horrible that we can relate on that note. But when I was first being diagnosed with IBS, I was really young as well. I think I was 13. And I was recommended to go see this gastroenterologist who was highly recommended. Everyone loved him, and it took a really long time to see him. And immediately when I saw him for the first time, again, he was very dismissive of my problems. It's just another young girl with all these stomach issues, blah, blah, blah. But he said, okay, let's go ahead and schedule an endoscopy and a colonoscopy just to make sure it's nothing serious. So we went through that. And then a few weeks later, he called me and my mom to come back in because my mom, of course, came with me to all my appointments too. And she was my biggest advocate. So I totally know how important that is. And I'm so thankful she was there because the doctor got the results back. And of course, nothing was wrong because not that we want something to be wrong, but we just want answers and we just want relief. So when he said nothing was wrong, I obviously started getting upset. And he wasn't even looking at me at the time. He was only talking directly to my mom. It was as if I wasn't even there. And he just looks at her and he goes it was something along the lines of, listen, I'm going to give her this diagnosis of irritable bowel syndrome, as a courtesy, because we don't know what else is wrong. But I personally believe she's just like the other young teenagers I see that have eating disorders. And because of that, she's not feeling well because she's not eating. So instead of being here, maybe you should put her in a girls' home and send her to therapy and be on your way. And I remember my mom just going silent. And I didn't know what to say either. I think I just started crying. And then all I can remember is us being in the car and us completely just shit talking the doctor and being like, how ridiculous is that? So yeah, Cassandra, I totally relate to your story, and it's awful that so many of us go through those types of experiences.
Definitely awful is the word. And I'm glad you were able to have that little cathartic moment later with your mom in the car, but that is just awful. And I'd like to thank everyone on our panel today for, not just showing up, but just being so vulnerable and really sharing your stories. We all really appreciate it. And all of you have been just so forthcoming and amazing. So thank you. And we really appreciate you and your stories. Okay, did anyone else just want to touch on that briefly? Otherwise, we can move on to our next question.
I would love to share my story about this is something that I share a lot because it's so flabbergasting to me. When And I'm going to just be quick. Basically, I had an abscess that was negligently treated, turned into sepsis within 3 months. I was in the hospital and the doctor told me it's inconvenient to do surgery. I was like, all right. And nobody advocated for me because there's a lot of patients that don't have advocates for them, which is why I became one. And he was like, basically go on all these pain meds. And then if that doesn't work, then we'll do surgery, which is crazy. I ended up collapsing because I was in horrific pain. This backfired on him because my pain doctor was like, listen, you need to do surgery or I'm going to put them on a pain pump because they are extremely sick and we've seen it. The morning I ended up having a twisted ovary. So we scheduled an emergency surgery within 2 days. The doctor tried to change the pain meds that he forced me on with the pain doctor. He tried to change them the day before surgery, and I had gotten my backbone at that point. And I said, no, you're not forcing me on medication and then making me change it when this is actually helping me and I'm going into surgery. So the morning I showed up dehydrated and it was horrible. I was throwing up before surgery because I was that sick. A twisted ovary is life-threatening. It can cause you to pass away, but it also can die. And I was with the anesthesiologist and the doctor walked in and he said, so how long are we going to need for the surgery? Like, just so I can advise the patient. And he said, well, see, here's the thing. The patient's addicted to pain meds. So we're just going to go in, we're just going to just look around 45 minutes tops. How was I addicted to pain meds I was on them for 4 weeks and I didn't take them correctly. Like I wasn't taking them because, again, shame, trauma, you're said that this is wrong. A lot of that becomes a problem. And I was like, a friend was in the room and they were like, this is an emergency surgery. What are you talking about? So moral of the story is karma is instant sometimes. And it was a 5-hour surgery because I had stage 4 endometriosis. The doctor had actually done his job. He would have realized that all of my symptoms lined up with what he found in the previous surgery and didn't actually excise. There's 2 types of techniques with endo. Well, there's many, but ablation, and he did ablation, which just burned the top off. So it spread completely around my entire abdomen, all over my diaphragm. And I ruined his entire schedule that day. So that was my payback. He did butcher me though, which I'll get into later with lessons. He butchered me because he was so pressed for time. He literally cut endo off of the nerves, like just cut the nerves because it was more convenient to cut the nerves than to actually excise the endo because he messed up. So needless to say, that is my favorite story to tell when it comes to advocacy because I just couldn't believe how far gone he was from the case.
Thank you so much, Bea, for sharing that story with us. That just sounds so harrowing. I think even for all of us just hearing the story, we're so sorry you had to go through that. Truly, truly awful. But thank you for sharing. We really appreciate your vulnerability. Okay, so
can I just add something really quickly?
Of course, please jump in.
I could share another story, but I just want to commend everyone for their vulnerability. I think this is the main reason why self-advocacy is so important. When I hear about mothers and friends and like Bea said, she got a backbone and started standing up for herself, that is what is needed. Like self-advocacy is so important. If you feel like you can't self-advocate for yourself, then you need to get a tribe like mother, father, girlfriends, like somebody who will stand in the gap for you. Because when another overwhelming thing is when you are going to the doctor's office, these types of scenarios are presented to you. Doctors are talking out their mouth crazy to you, and you have to take all that in by yourself and you don't have anyone there. So that's why it's so, so important to get a tribe or to say to yourself that I'm going to arm myself with the knowledge, with the resources, with the access to make sure that when I do go to the doctor and these types of scenarios are presented to me, then I know how to react. It's so, so important. Hearing everybody's story, thinking of my own stories, this is why we advocate the way we do, because not everyone has the privileges that we have where we're able to have a great mom or able to have able to get that strength from within. So how do we support communities that don't have this access and don't have, that confidence to self-advocate for themselves. A lot of times I say, sometimes we look at our physicians as like these people in these white coats. And I say, no, we have to dismiss that narrative. They are people who have a level of expertise. I didn't go to medical school. I didn't go to 4 years of residency. So I understand that I don't have that expertise, but I am an expert on my body. I know what's going on with me. I know that when there's a pain on my right side to the right of my belly button, I know what's going on with my ovary. So being able to articulate that, I may not be able to do it in a physician type of way, but know that your lay way of communicating, know that you are the expert and CEO of your body is vital. And knowing that the health practitioners in your life are, I like to call them my medical board of directors. So they guide me on the decisions I need to make. But are they the ultimate decision maker? No. So that's my soapbox for the day. I like to go off on that. But just hearing everybody's story, thinking of my own, and thinking of the work that each of us does individually, that's what we need to promote as well. Self-advocacy, making sure that if you can't do it for yourself, you get a tribe. And if your tribe is not there, like we all have organizations that will support you. I'm sorry, y'all. I just had to get that out because it's so important.
Do not even apologize, Tanika. This panel is honestly about providing all of you with soapboxes because the work everyone here does is so important, and we want to hear, all of your incredibly valuable insight. And definitely don't apologize because that was the most perfect transition anyone could have asked for, because our final prompt for the day is if our lovely panelists could kind of share specific lessons they've learned regarding self-advocacy with everyone who's attending today. I think it can be so difficult to kind of take on that self-advocacy role. So anything you have to share with all of us would be so, so valuable.
I would love to go first. I'm so excited for this question. Okay, so I have 3 lessons that I want to share with everybody. First of all, good bedside manner and poor skills is just as bad as poor bedside manner and good skills. And what that means is that they both do harm. So it's really easy to stay or believe a doctor, to kind of piggy off the last wonderful statement. But you have to realize that if a doctor is saying to you over and over again, you are the worst case I've ever seen, or if they're saying, if they're being validating, but you're getting worse, or you have, for example, for endometriosis, you can get frozen pelvis for bad skills. We don't realize the power we have and to know our worth and to know it's okay. If a doctor is good, they want you to have that second opinion. If a doctor is good, they want you to have a referral out because it's a medical team. You all work together. So if an expert in the field is not agreeing with them, they should want that because that will be best for you. My second lesson is you have the right to informed consent. Informed consent is the idea that you get all of the options laid on the table before moving forward. We see a lot with female health disorders where it's like, just do birth control, or it's just IBS. No, that's not informed consent. That's actually lazy doctoring. Unfortunately, that's in every system. And that's something that we all have to realize. I hear a lot like, oh, well, if you were in the UK, you would have better care. No, because this bias is in every system, and that informed consent is important in every single system, especially with women, because the FDA, we've seen from many pharma companies that they've lied about medication specifically for women in their clinical trials. For example, the drug Valbrun, the company came out and said, oh yeah, we fudged the numbers a little bit. And a lot of times what doctors are saying about a medication doesn't line up with the clinical trials. So your informed consent is really important. What you decide from there, everybody as an advocate would support you. If what's best for you is to try this medication that doesn't actually treat but help symptoms, we support you as long as you have informed consent. And there's a difference between informed consent and just and going with the flow. I literally had a doctor, just to share a quick where a doctor was like, I want you to try this medicine. I was really malnourished. I was throwing up. We realized later it was caused by a medication. But this doctor just wanted me off her floor when I was in the hospital. I was there for over 2 weeks. And they were like, you have to take this medicine, you'll get all better. And I was like, no, I'm actually allergic to that. And all of the medication in the family, I've tried it before, I have severe side effects. So she labeled me as non-compliant. One, self-advocacy is important. Choose your battles. If you can't fight, you can't fight. I just wish that I knew more. I was still in my 16th year of fighting, and I still had to take a step back, and that is okay, because you're a human being in a human being's body, and you're doing the best you can. But if you know that a medication doesn't work for you, you're not non-compliant, and you need to go higher if you can, which leads me to my third point. Provide feedback when possible. I know the system is broken. Report if you can. If you're in the hospital or you're in a clinic and you have a bad nurse or a doctor, report. To just piggyback again, I have a crisis center just so there is an advocate to make a phone call for you. If you can't do it, have someone do it for you. I didn't have a tribe. I didn't have people helping me. And so there are organizations out there where people will, especially now. And I know that that's a lax, but please know that exists. And please know that medical doctors are practicing medicine. Quality over quantity. Don't go to multiple doctors. Go to better doctors and know that there are people out there to help you. And if you need a week off, for goodness sake, take that week, and don't let anyone shame you in that, because this is a journey and it's extremely hard. I've thrown a teddy bear at the wall and I felt really bad about it because, you know, the teddy bear is very important to me. And I broke headphones that day, but I had to do that because of this is very difficult, and don't let anyone tell you that it's not. And those are my lessons, except for one more. You are enough, period.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much, B, honestly, for so many inspiring stories and points. And I think everyone here took something away from that. And just in general, you know, your story is so inspiring, the way you're so brave and deconstructing all of these issues as women's diseases. Really, I think that's so impactful. And it's so important to ensure we're being inclusive, just to, you know, make sure that we really are doing what all of us want to do, which is, you know, break down these barriers for everyone who faces these issues. So thank you so much. Next, if someone would like to jump in, please go ahead. Otherwise, I'm happy to call on someone.
I can quickly say something.
Wonderful.
I don't know how much this relates to the question, but I wish, and I make it my mission every single day, to let people know that they are not alone, and that the things that they go through are not necessarily isolating, and that there's a community out there for you to support you, to relate to you. I get hundreds of DMs sometimes of people asking questions, you know, how do I do this? How do I do that? And I like to turn that back to the community and say, okay, guys, like this person needs this. How can we support them? Or you know, let's talk about this topic in particular today. So like weight loss on medications, you know, different medications and specifics, how to advocate for yourself. I discuss all these different topics because I wish that somebody had reached out their hand to me when I was going through that. I watched the endometriosis community on social media for years and years and years, and was super, I admired them for a really long time before being part of it. And I'm really grateful that I can be part of it now. But that's just something that I strive for every single day. And I will scream that from the rooftops for as long as anyone needs to hear it. But you are never alone, and you could never be alone, because there are people from around the world who share the same experiences as you. So that's my soapbox for today.
Thank you. We love the soapboxes. And I think it's so wonderful how everyone here in a way is kind of providing for other people what wasn't necessarily available to them. And I think that's such a powerful step, you know, in the right direction. So thank you so much. Phil, would you like to go next? If you could kind of tell us about a lesson you've learned regarding self-advocacy.
Yeah, of course. I just want to say on the being alone point, you're not alone. Like, I absolutely love that. Like, that is the whole reason that we do this, I feel like, is to make people feel less alone. I absolutely love that. And also on the like the fighting for your own advocacy kind of point, it's also that like we're all ill, and like trying to fight at the same time as being ill is like a lot. And you know, you've got like, I mean, there's so much like admin, and it's literally like a full-time job being chronically ill, and then you also have to fight for yourself as well. And I just think that completely, if you need someone else to do it, it's the best thing. And knowing when to walk away from a situation, I completely agree. I also think that generally learning about advocacy has been such like an important skill to learn. I kind of wish that I had a choice to learn it rather than being an advocate by default, but it's really given me so much confidence to be able to take matters into my own hands, and it's a completely transferable skill that I can apply to so many aspects of my life. And the more I do it, the better I get. And yeah, I just think it's really good. And I also, when I was learning about advocating, I learned about it from other people so that I could recognize things like medical gaslighting and things like that, which is a term that I had never heard, because I think it's so helpful to be in a situation and you can say, okay, I know this pain is in my head. This doctor's just invalidating me. And to be able to like recognize that as well, I think it's, I think to recognize that that's what's happening rather than like, oh, the pain, maybe it is in my head. I'm being told it so often. Whereas you can actually just recognize that's invalidation that's happening right there. And it kind of just makes you feel a bit less crazy. I feel like, yeah, that's it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Phil, for sharing that. I think a really kind of, I don't know that I've necessarily personally thought about self-advocacy in those terms before, but I liked how you called it a transferable skill, because I think at the end of the day, self-advocacy, I mean, it really is a skill that some people do have to, you know, work at, but definitely the more practice you have, I think as soon as you kind of get over that first hurdle, you can definitely work on growing it. And I think all of your work really contributes to that as well for all of you. So thank you so much. Before we jump over to Christine, we'll let her wrap up this question. I think, Tanika, would you like to, I know you spoke a lot about self-advocacy, but if you'd like to kind of pinpoint a specific lesson that you'd like to share with us, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that sharing your story really leads to your healing and can also lead to your purpose. And I want to make sure that I put that in context by saying that it doesn't always mean sharing your story publicly. Like, we all have shared our story publicly, and you know, that's fine, but not everybody is where we are. So just getting it outside of your body. So does that mean sharing it with a small group that you can trust, or sharing it with close family members, journaling about it? Just get it outside of your body, because it releases the tension and the stress that you have. And I have recognized that by sharing my story, I have helped so many other people. I have been led to my purpose because I've shared my story. So sharing your story is really like a holistic practice. And like I said, it doesn't have to necessarily be done publicly, but also when it is done publicly, you recognize how many people that you can impact. I also want to share and just piggyback off of something that Phil said about being leaders in this area and also still going through our own personal journeys. I've had 2 myomectomies. I've had 7 blood transfusions. I've had 2 hysteroscopic procedures, all because of these quote unquote benign tumors. And it becomes hard, right? Because I'm still on my journey to motherhood, 2 IVF cycles, 2 failed embryo transfers, but yet I'm like, rah, rah, keep hope alive for, you know, so many other people. So I just wanted to acknowledge what Phil said about being, as a leader, making sure that you're also taking time for yourself and stepping away from the work sometimes, because it is, I remember when I had to have my 2nd surgery, and y'all might think this is crazy, but one of the things that bothered me is that I had to go back to my community and be like, oh, I have to have another surgery. Because I felt like they looked at me like, fibroid lady, like if you can't figure it out, then, you know, like, why do you have to have another surgery? And I almost felt the shame again and the stigma of not being able to figure it out for myself and figure it out for them. But what I learned through that process is that I'm on my journey as well. And by sharing my journey, then I encourage people and I humanize the situation. And I also learned that self-care is not selfish, right? I think so many times we've been taught that, like, if you take a day or you walk away from the kids or you walk away from your partner or you call in sick when you're not really sick, that you're somehow selfish. But if I can impart anything, that's it, that self-care is not selfish and that sharing your story is important and that being the CEO of your body and working with your health practitioners as a team is important. So yeah, self-care is not selfish and you are not alone like everybody else said.
Absolutely. Self-care is definitely such an important part of self-advocacy. So thank you for, emphasizing that to everyone. And I'd just like to say quickly before we pan over to Christine that we've talked a lot this morning about all of the wonderful work you do, the resources and support and community you all provide for people experiencing, similar issues or health concerns or health experiences or whatever it may be. But at the same time, it's just so important to acknowledge that this is so personal, and we really appreciate, that it can sometimes be hard to kind of balance that with almost an obligation to provide something for everyone else while still respecting your own boundaries and making sure that you are actually taking care of yourself. So I really want to thank you all for, sharing with us and emphasize that for us, while it's so valuable that you're sharing your story publicly, it's also so important, I think, to everyone in this space to just make sure that you're taking care of you at the same time. But yeah, Christine, please go ahead.
Sure. I mean, I think everyone has hit the nail on the head for anything I could say. The only other point I guess I could say that we've indirectly talked about anyway is to be picky of who you're allowing to be around you during this process and in this journey. I think all of us can relate that we've lost friends and, just people in our lives through this journey because it's difficult and there's a lot of ugly moments. And sometimes people, they have their own lives, they have their own things going on and they can't give enough to us during those times and it just doesn't fit. But whether it's bad doctors, bad friends, maybe it's a partner that's making you feel like a burden, maybe it's a family member. First of all, don't ever believe those people who make you feel that way. And second, you don't have to do it in a nasty way. You don't have to make it dramatic, but let those people go. Life is too damn short to be sick and to have crappy people in your life. So yeah. Community is everything, and make sure that the community you have around you is actually supporting you and validating you and showing you the unconditional love that you deserve. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Christine. Such a wonderful, wonderful, heartwarming note for us all to end on today. Definitely, like all of our panelists have mentioned, you're not alone and you deserve love and you deserve support and you should be getting that. So thank you once again to everyone for sharing your stories, for being so vulnerable and for making such insightful, valuable points. I think we all really learned something here today, and I think everyone's kind of taken something away with them that hopefully will help them in their own health experiences or journeys with chronic illness, disability, whatever it may be. And even just life. I feel like I'm walking away like a better person. So thank you all so much.